On this episode, before filming, we will be looking at what came before cinema, what inspired it, those who influenced it, and the progressions that created it. For over a century, since its inception, the motion picture has brought countless hours of fun and entertainment to the masses all around the world. The early days of the silent film era introduced a few on-screen pioneers, stars such as Bela Lugosi, who terrified audiences with his performances portraying monsters. His most notable and perhaps creepiest performance as Dracula is the stuff of legend. Then, there was also, arguably, the most famous performer of the silent era, Charles Spencer Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin wowed audiences with his dance moves and left them roaring with laughter with his comedic talent. These were just a couple of on-screen pioneers who would blaze the trail for actors and actresses of the present day. The on-screen careers of actors and actresses would not be possible if not for the advent of the motion picture. But what makes a motion picture? How did it come about? Who invented it? What was the first camera like? Right now, we will take a trip back through time to answer those questions and see how, when, where, and who were all responsible for bringing forth into existence something so special that it was once thought to be nothing but pure fantasy. The motion picture. This is a history of film. Theater. What is it? While it can be defined in a number of different ways, theater is generally considered to be a collaborative effort between the director, writers, actors, and crew to all come together and put on a staged production. It takes a collective effort of all involved to achieve the goal of putting on a show that will entertain audiences. How did the idea of theater come into existence? How did it become a cultural phenomenon all around the world? The evolution of theater has evolved since the first man walked the earth some hundreds of thousands of years ago. Its early roots can still be felt today. Humans have always felt a need to be amused and entertained. In the present day, we have so many forms of entertainment everywhere. Yet, for the first humans, they had none of the forms of technological entertainment we have to rely on today. So, what did they do for entertainment? They tapped into human ingenuity and used what was available to them and still found ways to pass the time. The tribes of primitive men would gather together around a large bonfire and have a festive time, which most likely included a feast. Also, there would be smoking of herbs, singing, chanting, and dancing. They even had fight shows. For some who were less interested in the fighting, singing, and dancing, found that drawing, carving, and painting on cave walls to be a great way to pass the time and keep entertained. Many of these traditions have been passed down through generations and are still growing strong today within many indigenous tribes around the world. The origins of theater can be traced back to the worshippers of Dionysus, the ancient Greek god of fertility and wine. One of the Greeks' early attempts to popularize theater was through the Festival of Dionysus, in which tribes from all over the country would converge upon Athens and hold many festival performances in honor of Dionysus. In keeping with the god's special interests, these ceremonies were exciting occasions. His female devotees, in particular, danced themselves into a state of frenzy carrying long phallic symbols known as thyrsus. They would then tear to pieces and devour the raw flesh of sacrificial animals. But the Dionysians also developed a more structured form of drama. They danced and sung stories of the Greek myths. It was around this time in ancient Greece when a priest of Dionysus by the name of Thespis brought a never-before-seen element on stage. This element can be viewed as the birth of theater. What Thespis did was engage in dialogue with the chorus. He becomes, in a sense, the first actor, thus eventually giving birth to the term thespians. Ever since, actors in the West have called themselves thespians in honor of Thespis. During these early Greek festivals, the actors, directors, and dramatists were all usually one and the same person. However, some larger productions would often have 3 male actors, as well as a choir. Ancient Greek theatrical productions were original and innovative. They would forever define what theater was then and still is today. Many of the on-stage aspects implemented back then are still used in the present day. What was the setting like for audiences who came to see a performance in ancient Greece? Well, during 5th century BC Athens, audiences sat on bare hillsides to watch performances take place on a temporary wooden platform. In the 4th century, a stone auditorium is built on the site, and there is still a theater there today, which is known as the Theater of Dionysus. However, this is a Roman reconstruction from the time of Nero. By then, the shape of the stage is a semicircle. In the first Greek theaters, the stage was a full circle shape. This stage is called the orchestra because it's where the chorus sing and dance. Epidurus, built about 340 BC, provides the best example of a classical Greek theater. In the center of the orchestra is the stone base on which an altar stood, reflecting the religious aspect of theater in Greece. The rising rows of seats separated by aisles provided the pattern for the closest part of the auditorium to the stage in nearly all subsequent theaters, where these seats are still sometimes called the orchestra stalls. The Romans are most famously known for a very different kind of theoretical setting, the Colosseum. The thrill of live death and real blood spilled during the gladiator games appealed to them much more than the make-believe of the Greek dramas. The Roman circus was far more famous than the Roman theater. However, they were among the first to create a theater setting in which everyone in the audience could hear the sounds and voices coming from the stage. Kind of the first surround sound. The best example of this is the aforementioned famed Colosseum. The Colosseum was built with its circular funnel-like shape, letting anyone hear what was happening at the center. This is called an amphitheater. The Romans' most popular form of entertainment were gladiatorial games and battles inside amphitheaters, which people, usually prisoners, would battle with someone else or an animal to the death in order to earn their freedom. Another popular form of entertainment came in the form of chariot races, those of which were hosted in events called the circus. As time went on, theater began to lose its luster. During the Dark Ages, any sort of social stability was non-existent, as politics, economy, and the people's satisfaction and morals were more important. Theater took a back seat. However, around 975 AD, drama found a new light from altar boys who included it within the religious service. More plays had an emphasis on biblical themes such as Easter, Christmas, and the Feast of Epiphany. This was the beginning of the medieval period. A group known as the guilds started to take control of theater, but the church had to approve it before it could commence. Around the 1200s, most of the plays were in Latin, the language of the church at the time. By 1350, more ordinary people would become actors and writers, which in turn made plays more vernacular than ever before. Surprisingly, primitive machinery was used as a production tool, such as using it to fly Jesus Christ up to heaven or angels coming down. Costumes from this period were most likely ordinary church vestments. There were more defined roles within a theatrical production. The master copy of the script was called the register, with the production company or guild having the power to monopolize, censor, or even ban it from public view. The keeper of the register was seen to be a very important person. The man in charge of the special effects was called, funny enough, the Master of Secrets, who was in charge of the machines and making sure everything, even props, worked properly as intended. The machines required many people working together in unison in order for it all to function. As many as 17 people needed to work together to make it fully operational. The decline of medieval theater most likely occurred due to a combination of these three reasons. Increased interest in classical learning, which affected staging and playwriting. The social structure changed. And dissension from the church led to the outlawing of religious plays by Queen Elizabeth in 1545. The medieval theater lost all momentum by the late 16th century. The Renaissance movement evolved by the early 16th century. The term Renaissance literally means rebirth, as a new age of enlightenment and discovery passed through Europe, redefining the guidelines for playwrights, artists, and architects. The establishment of permanent and lucrative public theaters was a factor in the success of the English Renaissance. Some of the most famous theaters were the Curtain Theatre in 1577, the Rose in 1587, the Swan in 1595, and the Globe in 1599. Theater during this time featured three forms of drama: tragedy, comedy, and pastoral, with the latter featuring romanticized characters in an idyllic rural setting. Unlike nowadays, a team of actors would rarely act the same play 2 days a week with a tremendous workload. It's notable that female parts were played by adolescent boy players in women's costumes until the reign of Charles II. After the decline of the Renaissance period, theater continued on without much change until the neoclassical era. For the most part, plays were written with themes that followed the origins of early theater. Furthermore, plays during this era tended to over-romanticize or over-sexualize their characters, thus bringing a more risque aura not seen in theater until this time. The likes of Aristotle, Dante, and Shakespeare helped bring these newfound movements in theater to life. All three of them were instrumental in not only popularizing theater, but revolutionizing it with their daring social commentary that never failed to offend. Without these revolutionary minds, we wouldn't have such classics such as Aristotle's Poetics, Shakespeare's Hamlet, and Dante's Inferno. As we progress toward the later half of the 1800s and the early 1900s, there were many who both opposed and accepted a new form of theater called cinema. Conservatives were normally the ones who rejected the idea of movies. They despised the negative connotation it had with the Sunday nights, as it turned potential churchgoers away from their duty to their faith. The thing that they despised the most, however, was the fact that an actor could be seen in several different projects in a single year, as opposed to being in one or two stage productions at that time span. Those who accepted this new cinematic experience, however, not only did so for the sheer enjoyment and wanting to experience something new, but to be a part of a movement. Most of the people who were involved came from a theater background. The connectograph was the primary invention which helped Louis Lumiere invent his motion picture camera. Truth be told, Lumiere wasn't the only person experimenting with this new thing, but he did something that set his invention apart from the others. His camera was portable, had a film processor, and a projector. He called his 3-in-1 contraption the cinematograph. This early camera set the stage for a new form of entertainment yet to come in the future. Thomas Edison was another great mind that people associate with early cinema. Not only did he improve upon Lumiere's invention of the connectograph, but he also made some of the most revered films of his time, such as The Kiss and The Great Train Robbery, both of which are still enjoyed till this day. Georges Méliès, however, is often considered the godfather of cinema for his revolutionary filmmaking techniques for that time. Most notable, being one of the first directors to have colored films and being a user of early special effects. This can best be seen with his magnum opus 1902 film, A Trip to the Moon. Needless to say, the origins of cinema are deeply rooted with what came before it and those who influenced it. The past age of theater has spawned a cinematic future. Over time, entertainment has transitioned and evolved so much since its inception of a few tribe members dancing, and now is a monopoly of our everyday lives. It's not hard to imagine what it took to get there. Georges Méliès' A Trip to the Moon may have never happened had it not been for Aristotle reciting a few poems.